So before we actually get started with the checkout process, let's kind of make a roadmap on how we want to build this. It's a little bit different than our cart, right? So it makes sense that our shopping cart would basically you add a product there and then it updates the totals, right? The checkout process is a little bit different. Like, well, what are we going to do if it's a guest user or not? Like, what if it's an authenticated user? How do we handle those two things? So that's actually what we have to go about doing in this one is handling generally how that's going to work out. So we want to talk about it first. So I'm going to just make a quick note here, and I'm just going to save it inside of the app. I'm going to make a folder in here saying notes. Oh, sorry, not inside of the source code, but just inside the dev here, notes. And we're just going to call this checkout process.md. You don't have to write these notes if you don't want to. I'm just going to have them on there. So checkout process, right? Now, first and foremost, you're going to go to the cart and then you'll go to checkout, right? So there's going to be a checkout view. That's fairly straightforward, right? We definitely need that checkout view. Now, what happens typically on the checkout views on other e-commerce sites, right? Either you log in or you enter an email as a guest, right? That's typically what happens. I mean, actually log in /register, but we're going to worry about, actually we'll have login register. We'll have that sort of functionality in there, but we probably aren't going to handle too much of this right here because that's a whole nother section. So we will just go off of the login portion basically, but have the ability to do either one of those. So that's one thing. And then after that, what do these users typically do? They usually enter their shipping address, and then their billing info, right? So billing info, like their billing address. So we have two billing addresses here now, and then also their like credit card or payment, right? So something along those lines. So that's typically what happens on our checkout views. Okay. So the next part is like, how do we make sense of all this, right? How do we separate these things out into being their own components, right? So this checkout process, and we actually have to handle a few different components. The first one is going to be our billing app. So the billing app or billing component is really just the shell of a billing component because we're going to make a billing profile. I'll explain this as we go, but hopefully it makes sense. You're going to create a profile that's going to be associated to either a user or an email. Now, this is going to be a guest email, of course, right? So we're going to have to figure out how that's going to work. But other things that you might do with this billing profile are like generating your payment processor token, like for that individual user or email. This is like using Stripe or Braintree. I believe they both allow you to generate a token that represents this person, assuming that they may or may not have put in credit card information. So that's pretty much where we're going to leave it with that, right? So this is going to allow us to revisit this in the future on how we can integrate other payment processors like Stripe or Braintree. The next thing is we're going to want to have an orders/invoices component or app, app/component. So this is really actually collecting this data, right? So we have carts, and the carts themselves actually have some information about it, but it doesn't have the things above here, right? It doesn't have the, connecting the billing profile. It does not have anything to do with the shipping or billing addresses. It also needs to connect the cart and its status. Has it shipped, canceled, and so on, right? So that is generally where we're going with this. We have to kind of start with this as the basics, and hopefully you look at this and say, "Wow, this is actually a lot." So now it makes sense why even just that payment processing token part is only just a minor piece into the grander scheme of what we're going to be doing with this checkout process. We might add to what we're doing here, and I'll try to update this little overview on the actual documentation. But in general, this is where we're going to be going. So let's go ahead and get started.